Good morning. What a glorious Wisconsin Sunday morning. I hope wherever you are, it's as nice and exciting as it is here in Wisconsin. It's going to be a little chilly this weekend. And thanks for joining us here, joining me here this morning on Here's My Issue. And welcome to anyone new watching the show. And of course, thank you for coming back if you're coming back to see me again. As always, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Please share the video. And then, of course, today, please call in at 715-352-0801. And if you follow me on Facebook, we had some exciting interchange over the last 24 hours. And I have found out that Menards has hired Pinkerton security guards to enforce their wearing a mask rule. And I posted that, and boy, did everybody jump in on that one. Holy cow. Everybody had lots to say. So if you have some more interesting things to talk about on that subject, I really would love to hear what you have to say today, and love to have that exchange and talk about whatever you're thinking. I mean, it really wasn't anything more than an observation that Menards went to the extreme measures of hiring Pinkerton guards. And that should be concerning, and we can talk about that as we go through the show today. But, you know, it's interesting. I've been talking about it with different people, and they ask a lot of great questions. And, you know, one of the questions that came up is no shirt, no shoes, no service. And if they require masks, you know, and you have to wear a mask to go into a store, is that any different? Well, yes and no. I think masks provide much more invasive issues related to, are we going to spend our lives walking around anytime we leave our homes in a mask? And it also comes down to whether or not you agree with personally how our immune systems work. And do we actually do more harm than good by trying to keep our bodies from having exposure to viruses and to things that our bodies need to be exposed to build immunity. That being, for an example, would be why people like to take the flu shot. I mean, the flu shot's not required, never has been. It's been completely voluntary. People can take it, not take it, which should lead you to believe that over the last 20 years or so, no one in the CDC or any of these big government agencies was concerned enough that they needed to make flu shots mandatory. I mean, COVID virus was in the air long before COVID-19. And COVID has been part of the flu shot for many, many years. And it's never been mandatory. And it's a flu shot. And again, it's not a flu vaccine, it is a flu shot. And we are exposed in small part to many strains of the flu virus. And I don't understand why people are saying this is not the flu. This is the flu. It's been the flu. COVID is a flu. COVID has been a flu forever. The fact that we labeled it COVID-19 does not change the fact that it's a flu. Now, does it mean it's not more aggressive? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just still means it's a flu. And on its very face, people should understand that the virus itself is going to act just like a flu, and there isn't going to be a vaccine. If they somehow magically come up with a vaccine for COVID, then that means they can come up with a vaccine for the flu, and hallelujah. I mean, if I didn't have to go through the flu every year, boy, that would be awesome. Now, I don't get the flu every year, but when I get it, I get sick. I get really sick, and you can't tell me that when you get the flu, you don't get sick, and you haven't been up at night in the bathroom dealing with having the flu and then having to call into work to let them know you're not coming in. And you can't tell me you didn't go to work with the flu and give it to all your coworkers, because I know you have, because I've watched them do it in the places I've worked. And I watched it do it when I owned businesses and employees coming in sick. and having to ask them to say, hey, maybe you should probably go home today. And my point in all this is that we need to stop taking this to these extremes. And that was the reason I posted the comment to Facebook regarding the Pinkerton security guards. That's just over the top. And the way they had it laid out and the way this individual approached people, I mean, he came right up to people, right up in their face. He was within a foot telling them they can't come in the store. He was physically putting himself between the entry and them so that they could not enter the store. This behavior is not consistent. I mean, he doesn't have, so what, he has a mask on. He doesn't have he's not behind a face block or whatever they're calling it, these splash guards. Like you go to the post office now, they have these plexiglass, flimsy barriers up so you can stand in front of it. That way, if you sneeze, you spit on the plexiglass. Well, he's not behind the plexiglass barrier, and he's going right up into people's faces. And there's nothing to show that masks prevent the spread of the virus. Nothing. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So it was interesting. Appreciated everybody jumping in. It was, it's trending. I mean, just a ton of people have things to say from both sides of you. Some people love masks. Some people hate masks. Some people aren't going to go to Menards anymore. Some people are going to go to Menards because they appreciate it. So let's talk a little bit about the science of what we're trying to perpetuate by saying masks work. So when we breathe in and out every day, we have moisture, right? So they're all talking about droplets. And we breathe in and we breathe out. Well, in order to restrict what is coming in and out of our breath, they've come up with surgical masks that surgeons wear to keep viruses from, or contaminants or bacteria from introducing itself into the surgical room, right? So they become sterile, meaning the air that they're breathing in and out is kept sterile. So in order to do that, these masks have to literally stop whatever is being filtered down to almost 0.000 infinitive, right? Because if you look at what they're saying for COVID-19 is being touted as being a 0.07 to 0.09 micron size molecule. All right. So a surgical mask, if it's stopping these types of things, literally was going to have to restrict anything of any size. From 0 up, right? I mean, even negative. I mean, in order to keep patients safe, that surgical mask needs to be worn. Well, we all know what the status of surgical masks are. And if you read anything on the internet, they talk about how the surgical masks need to be kept for the health industry and for hospitals, which makes sense. But we're going into 8 weeks on this. So why aren't we producing surgical masks that people can wear? That I'm assuming this because I'm not an expert on surgical masks, that then people can get surgical masks and actually stop the viruses, all kinds of viruses, from passing through the mask. And right now, if you're not wearing a surgical mask, there's nothing doing that. And in particular, if you look at an N95 mask, I mean, the next mask that they were talking about were these N95 masks. And they use these a lot in hospitals and surgical centers to combat making sure that people working in high-risk areas in the hospital have a way to keep that from going. And it provides a better seal. The surgical masks don't seal tightly. Never have. But from the point of view of kind of a respirator, they came up with the N95 mask. And I know this because I am a licensed structural engineer, and I've had to go into areas where respirators are required, from an N95 mask to an actual rubber with cartridges, the dual cartridges type mask. And you have to go through a seal test. In order for a respirator to be effective, and a lot of times if my beard's getting in the way, I have to shave my beard off. So in order to make sure I get a tight seal, I either have to make sure I can shave my beard, closer to my lips and out inside where the mask will go around, so that the mask can be fit and tightened so that it makes a tight seal and nothing can escape. And the only way that any air movement is occurring is through the cartridges. So the N95 mask, it has some of the same features. If you look at it, it has a rim around the outside that tends to lay against your face. And then those straps pull that so that flange hopefully seals against your face. And then it has a steel band across your nose, and you pinch that steel band down on top of your nose, which helps create this seal. It's still not a perfect seal because it's just an elastic band. So you're only going to get so much, but you're going to get better than a surgical mask. Also, this mask is made from polypropylene, electrostatic polypropylene, and it resists moisture and moisture buildup. And then it filters from 0.3. Now, this is important because it only filters from 0.3 up. So even wearing an N95 mask right now, you're not stopping the COVID-19 virus, because the COVID-19 virus is a 0.07 to 0.09, and it happily just moves right through the mask. So from N95, you have R95s, you have other types of 95 masks, because an N95 is non-oil. So if you're just outside and you're not in an oil environment where you could be exposed to oils, then the mask itself can be used that way. But then you need to have a different type of mask if you're in different environments, and different masks, if they are going to be resistant to oil, would have different properties and might have more restricted properties, meaning maybe they stop more. But these masks get more and more expensive, and facilities only produce a certain amount based on demand each year. So ramping that up may be more difficult. But again, at 8 weeks in, we should be easily able to produce N95 masks and have them in the stores so that people can purchase them. Yes, of course, in March, when this all started to come to a head and people were looking for N95 masks and we were worried about supplies in the healthcare industry, we had to do something to keep that from going too far, and that not having that equipment available at the hospitals. But here's the thing. In Wisconsin, we have nowhere near taxed our healthcare industry at a level that it would cause us or lead us to believe that they don't have ample supplies at all of these facilities. The only reason they wouldn't is that they never bought any. So the only reason they may not have them is because they never purchased them. There's been nowhere near the level of pressure on our healthcare system, just like New York, even though they said that they were going to overpopulate New York. The boat only had maybe 200 people on it at any given time. The hospitals were not overrun. They never exceeded their capacity. They had more than adequate capacity. So that being said, hospitals need to supply themselves to capacity. So it would make sense. Let's just say, you've got 1,000 people that can be in a hospital, and it's never over capacity, and it has to run each day. It has supplies to handle that for so long. I mean, it can't be a just-in-time inventory. Like they've got to get shipments every day. That would be stupid. I mean, that would be poor planning. So, I mean, is this a planning issue? And did somebody drop the ball? We don't get any of this information. So why aren't these masks available? And then we go to the idea of a cloth mask. So what's a cloth mask going to do? So it's like a piece of shirt material, or it's a piece of cloth you buy at Joann Fabric, and you make a nice mask. Well, that, number one, collects moisture. Number two, it has no ability to stop the microns. I mean, I don't know what micron level it can stop. I mean, an N95 mask is specifically designed to 0.3. So if it only is going to stop 0.5 or 0.7 type microns, it's not going to do anything for COVID. And it's going to make everybody feel better. But then what about the fact that now this mask is damp? and you're fiddling with it. So your hands are up in your face, right? So you got this mask on and you're walking through the store and you're fiddling with your mask and the virus is on the mask and the virus is coming through the mask and you're touching the dampness on your mask and you're fiddling with it and you're touching your eyes and you're touching your nose because maybe you didn't have COVID when you walked in, but you walked by somebody who did and a drop got on your mask and it got on your finger and you touched your eye. So is there an argument that says it's just a bacteria collector? So this fabric mask is just a bacteria collector and it actually increases the chances to get the virus than stop it. I mean, they're all arguments. I mean, and science is the only thing that can show anything different, not just because we believe it. I mean, it's a comfort factor right now more than anything because when you read on the internet, everybody has a different opinion. There is no science. There's no documented science where somebody's done a study and they've looked at the pressures that are exerted when you breathe. They look at the pressures that are exerted when you sneeze, when you cough, and then what happens to the mask when you do that. And as a structural engineer, I can tell you very clearly a couple of things. One, when that pressure is forced through a narrowing environment, it gets stronger than when it's dispersed into a larger environment. So when you have a free flow from your mouth, nothing restricting it, the amount of pressure and how far that would travel is less. When you cone this down and you concentrate that area that the air has to flow through, the pressures increase, meaning it's going to actually go out further when you cough. And that's scientifically shown. We do this all the time when we're dealing with fluids, and anybody out there has done engineering and understands fluid dynamics, understands as we want to build pressure, we restrict flow. Perfect example would be the gas industry. My very good friend used to work for the gas pipelines, pumping natural gas across the country, and his expertise was in fixing jet engines. He was an AP mechanic. And his job, because how they moved gas along the pipelines, was they had stations, substations, whatever you want to call them, with big, and usually two, because they had one primary and one backup, jet engines. And the jet engines produce a lot of heat. And so when we want to expand gas, what do? We heat it up. So these jet engines would heat up the gas, which would increase the pressure, and the gas would move through the lines as a result. And then they scientifically figured out how often they needed these stations, and the gas flows through the pipes, starts to cool, contracts and builds less pressure, and then goes into the next station and is heated and is sent on its way again. I mean, that's scientific. Okay, so there's been nothing that I've seen or produced to show what happens when we cough or sneeze or even breathe that increases the pressure that's being forced out of this mask, which actually then sends those particles further out than they would normally. And they want to tell us that it actually is okay if, we're wearing masks because we know people are going to be closer together. Well, I would argue, no, that's not the case at all. That a mask would actually increase the distance the particles could flow. And unless the mask can stop down to 0.01 or less, it's not doing anything for COVID. And in fact, it's actually creating a collection point that's going into the primary area you're breathing this in, going through your nose and your mouth. And that's just my opinion, but I do a lot of engineering, and I can tell you that in terms of filtration and dealing with OSHA and the requirements to make sure that people stay safe and how we keep them safe, there's tons of data as it relates to microns and what is needed in order to stop that so you can be safe when you go into dust environments, when you go into gaseous environments where there are gases that are harmful. I mean, there are specific things that need to be done. The way the masks are being handled, don't even get close. An N95 mask, just to kind of bring you going back, again, I said N is non-oil. 95 means it's 95% efficient, but it's only 95% efficient to 0.3 microns and above. Anything below that is going to just flow through the mask. It's not going to stop it. And as we said, the microns they're saying that these COVID viruses take on are about 0.07 to 0.09. And as we talked about, it's a non-woven polypropylene material. So it's going to be resistant to moisture. And it's not going to have moisture or allow moisture to collect, which will then also help the fact that it's not going to collect and create an even more attractive area for things to build up or collect. And then again, here's a basic principle of wind design. When you have the free flow of air, the wind speed stays consistently the same and the pressures stay the same. When you put something in front of that and the air has to flow around because it's restricted through your fabric mask or through a mask that doesn't have some kind of respirator on it, the areas around the mask, if they're not sealed, they actually increase the pressure because the air has to flow faster to get in to meet the air that's coming through the other mask. So it goes faster, builds pressure. It's going even more. There's even more pressure pushing in along the sides and the rim of your mask. So if you have particles coming at you from all areas, these areas tend then to become concentrated areas where the air will flow around your mask. And as we talked about, we come back to proper fitting and moisture resistance. So there's so many questions related to what these masks are actually doing, and the primary one is the size of the particles. I mean, if it can't take 0.07 or 0.09 out, it's not going to stop anything. It's not doing anything for you. And I argue, in fact, it actually makes it worse. Okay, and then we talk about concerns about freedoms, and there were questions about that in the Facebook post, and we can argue those different things. And yeah, I mean, eventually what will happen is people will just not go into stores that require masks if they don't want to wear masks. So the people who want to wear masks will go to one store. The people who don't want to wear masks can go to another one, and that's fine. I mean, that's great. My comment was, again, the extreme levels that the world's going to right now. If you watch anything that's going on in California, moving into our next topic, talking about what governments are doing, and you see pictures of people doing protests, nonviolent protests, to get the states open back up, and what do you see? I mean, really. I mean, you can't tell me you haven't looked at a news report and seen police in full riot gear with wood batons. And then, of course, I'm sure there's a component of them that are carrying AR rifles, and they are ready for anything because there are people carrying guns at these rallies. But primarily they're carrying batons. And so you have people there who are protesting. And don't you think that by having the police come in full riot gear and batons, they actually heighten the concern or heighten the aggression? And so are we really saying that they would actually use these batons on the citizens? I mean, think about it. I mean, they're there, they've got a baton, they don't like what's happening, they just reach up and rap somebody on the side of the head with that baton. I mean, holy cow, we've had lots of campuses that this hasn't worked at before, and I don't know why anyone would think it would work now. It really is asinine. You don't need police officers in full riot gear to manage a protest, nonviolent protest at a state capitol, unless you're trying to control them. So that's where the issue of freedoms come into concern, is that the police don't need to do anything. The people are there to protest, which they have every right to do and is protected under the Constitution, and they really have no right to disband them. When it becomes an issue is when the police try to assert some sort of authority that exceeds their authority inside of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that people then start to rise up. I mean, they start to push it to an issue where people are going to move to more violent actions because they're being told they can't be there when, in fact, they can. Even if a governor's issued a stay-at-home order or a quarantine order, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution provide for us the ability to go out and protest that legally. And arresting people is illegal if they are out protesting an action by the government. They have no authority to do that. They abuse their authority when they do. And that is really why the conversation occurs is as we become more and more desensitized to these abuses of power, where you've got police in full riot gear at a nonviolent protest, where you have Pinkerton security. We don't even know if the guy had a gun. I didn't even take the opportunity to ask, but he had a large coat on. There's nothing that says he doesn't have a taser or a gun underneath his coat, but they're not disclosing that anywhere. They're not telling anybody that. And his aggressive nature just basically told me he probably did. And some of the things that have happened around the country, and that most unfortunate event in Michigan, I would really believe that why Menards thinks they need to have Pinkerton security in Wausau, Wisconsin, is they're of the opinion that people are going to rise up, which they may very well do, and they're concerned about keeping people out or controlling what's going on, and trying to put controls on people in the United States of America is not a good thing. It doesn't happen. People eventually just don't put up with it anymore. So that's where the concerns come, because we want to make sure we understand what the nature is of any of these actions, and as these actions get greater and greater, we should be concerned. And that brings up again the next topic, which is, what about drones? We still haven't gotten a clear answer from the state of Wisconsin as to what they're using drones for in this state, and if they are actually being used to monitor communities and violate their civil rights related to due process and search and seizure. The police have no authority to simply use technology to go in without a warrant and monitor people. I mean, and their argument is, well, we can't get into these areas. Well, that's the point. You are not supposed to. Unless you have probable cause, you are supposed to stay the hell out. And we're losing sight of that principle. The government, the police, city governments are really, they have no authority to monitor our daily actions. They have to have probable cause. They have to go through a legal process. And if they violate that process, then whatever they've done isn't admissible, and whatever happens is thrown out. So why wouldn't you be concerned if the government's taking steps to collect data on you without a warrant? I am. Which brings us to Governor Evers here in Wisconsin, because this is the one I'm following the most closely, because, states like Michigan right now, I can't even watch. She's just absolutely asinine and ridiculous. And Governor Evers, of course, is my governor, and I'm more concerned right now about what's going to happen here. And in terms of the plan that's being proposed, is we're focusing on this testing. Can anybody tell me why we can test for COVID-19, we can't test for the flu? So when you go into the doctor and you have flu symptoms, why aren't they testing you? So that you could establish that you have the flu. I mean, I really don't believe that whatever they're using to test is even viable, because nobody's explained how are we able to test for COVID-19, but we're not able to test for the flu. And that part of the way we're going to be allowed to reopen the state is that he wants to reach a certain number of tests every day. Why? Why would it be any different than showing symptoms? Because we don't show symptoms? Well, we've been happy to let people parade with the flu around and get people sick all day long and have people die without having to do testing. Now, why is that a concern? Back to our freedoms. Okay, so think about this. So you're going to be going to apply for a job. And right now, a lot of companies require drug tests and drug screening in order to get the job. So are they now going to require COVID-19 testing? So meaning in order for you to get a job, you're going to have to test to see if you've had or do have COVID-19. And then what is the company's policy going to be? So let's say you have COVID-19 and you don't show any signs. Does it just stay in you? Does it go away? I mean, there's no data to show that. We're developing policies to decide how we're going to reopen states, and we have no clue what the virus does. So how do you develop a process that, doesn't violate people's rights to have a job and to take care of their family if you don't even really understand the virus at all right now? So you're going to go to get a job, you're going to get tested for COVID-19, you test positive, but you're not showing any signs. Well, according to the current proposal, then you're immediately going into quarantine for 14 days. Then you'd be tested after 14 days. I mean, what is that? And then if 14 days, if you still have COVID, are you going to be quarantined for another 14 days? And when does it stop? They can't tell you when you stop being contagious. They cannot tell you that right now because they do not know. They cannot tell you that it's 14 days because they do not know. They simply say it can be as quick as immediately to possibly 14 days. They don't know. And they've just made up this 14-day cycle to, again, just like masks, create some idea that this is going to work. They don't know it works. They keep coming up with new discoveries and they keep changing the data. So they're changing the data to include probable cases. What's a probable case? You really should be concerned about these things. When you produce reports, you can't manipulate the data and have the report be viable. The data has to stay consistent and it has to stay neutral. And it has to stay in the same format it was using. You can't compare data to when you were simply saying if it wasn't definitively COVID-19, it wasn't being reported as COVID-19, to now saying, well, we're now including probable cases. Why would you do that? Well, because you manipulate the data and you want to make sure you're having enough cases to support your decision to not reopen the states. Which then, of course, leads to these conversations about social tracking, contact tracing, contact tracking. And as I've told you, there is no way in hell I will ever tell anybody who I've been in contact with, so that when I do that, they contact them. And if they test and everybody in that chain tests positive for COVID, they'll now be put in quarantine for 14 days. If you can't figure out the implications of that and the violations of privacy and the violations of people's ability to continue to work and take care of themselves, and if you believe for a second that if in a manufacturing environment you have to contact your employer and say you got COVID-19 and you're going to have to be quarantined for 14 days so you can't come into work for 2 weeks, and you want to take all your PTO and you think you're going to keep your job, you're just oblivious. There is nothing protecting your right to that job at this point. Nothing. Employers are firing people and laying people off. The government put out these loans to encourage employers to continue to keep people employed, but yet people are being laid off to the tune of, we're at probably 35 or 40 million people out of work right now. So if this loan process was working and employers understood they need to carry people that way, then why do we have 40 million people out of work? So that doesn't work. And you're fooling yourself if you think an employer or someone who's got to write the write the check, is going to simply carry people for 2 weeks and pay them. And then what do they do after 14 days? What risk are they at then? So in the lack of science and the lack of a process, we create an environment where people will be afraid every day for no good reason. And where are all our legislators? And I'm not just talking about Wisconsin. I'm saying around the country. We are so far into this now. We're approaching 60 days, and not a single legislature has passed a bill. Not a single elected person has proposed a bill and sent it to the floor in any states, and especially the states around this area, that says reopen the states now. You are not going to violate people's civil rights. You're going to have to use the Bill of Rights and the Constitution in whatever process you're putting together. You are not allowed to implement processes that violate people's civil rights. And that's America. That's how it works. And if the government doesn't like it, tough. And all I can tell you is, why do we not see these bills, and why do we not see these legislators taking a stand? Because they know if they make a stand that somehow turns negative, it could cost them their office. Their decision to not take action is purely political. So by being able to simply blame the governor and defer that and make the focus the governor, they can simply just say, well, we couldn't do anything about it. The governor had all of the power. Well, that's wrong, because in the state of Wisconsin, the legislature could have passed a bill the day after the lockdown went in place, and they could have come up with some better solution and put it on the governor's desk. And when he vetoed it, then they could have overridden the veto, and we could have been moving forward from a position of having all of the people that are elected to represent us here in Wisconsin making decisions, not just one. And not just one who's politically motivated to help or do whatever he can to keep the current president from being reelected. Yeah, I said it. And if you think that's not part of this decision making, you're as naive as it gets. And as we've seen with people with dissenting views, and providing alternative ideas and thoughts are being restricted and taken down. The idea that what we see on the internet or in news reports is accurate and unbiased becomes less and less trustworthy. So that makes it even more impossible for people to understand what's actually going on, because they're controlling that data. And they're continuing to abuse powers based on that manipulated data and fear. So as we wrap up today, on that note, I'm going to have a link to a video for a woman that has worked directly with the Centers for Disease, with Fauci, and she talks about what happened to her during the AIDS crisis in terms of how they were going to try to come up with a vaccine or a way to cure people or a way to help people, and how that correlates to what's happening now. And when she provided a dissenting view and scientific data that showed a dissenting view, what happened to her. So I encourage you to go down into the links below, look at those links and click through and watch that video. And again, I mean, the video isn't there to just say, hey, this is the right answer, or hey, this is the only information. It's there for you so that you can make a decision as to whether you agree with it or not, or to seek out other information, or to, hey, call into the show. So please take a moment to click through those links and watch those videos. As always, there'll probably be videos for Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham, just so that you have a way to get to those very quickly, because that is important to understand these, again, dissenting views. We're getting lots of views that tell us we're all going to wear masks for the rest of our lives, that there's going to be a cure, that there's going to be a vaccine, and that what we're doing is the right thing. Well, there should be opposing views that say, no, there isn't any science supporting it, and demanding some sort of science that shows what we're doing is actually working. So is it just me that is saying that our rights are being violated every day, that we're seeing authoritarianism, that we're seeing socialism, that we're seeing communism on a daily basis, and everybody is just blindly saying, hey, this is awesome, woohoo, this is what we got to do? I'm going to leave that to you. And if you stayed to watch this video through to this point, please comment. I'd like to know your thoughts. Please subscribe. Please like the video. Please share the video. And as always, please, if you have the opportunity to watch my show when it's live broadcasting, please call in at 715-302-0801. Food for thought. Food for thought today. What's our food for thought? Our food for thought today really centers on the premise that we are in a position of not knowing if the data we're getting is accurate, is unbiased, and true. And as I've said in the past, what are you going to do when you did nothing to protect your civil rights and the rights protected for you under the Constitution, and they simply do the worst? On that note, it's a great sunny day, so have a great one, and I'll see you tomorrow. No, actually, I'll see you next week.